this is the problem with Mormon history, is that they reconstructed 50, 60, 100 years after the event, such as the Fanny Alger event, that dirty little affair. That was completely invented 15 years after Smith's um, interaction with Fanny Alger. And it was decided that it was actually the person had the dirty little affair with Fanny Alger was actually Oliver Cowdery, who blamed or accused Joseph Smith. We accuse people of our own sins. But anyway, so here's Thomas Barnes, coroner at Carthage, who is writing in a letter his remembrances of what happened at Carthage as he was the coroner. Now, in this letter, he never states that he examined the Smith bodies. He only examined John Taylor's body very carefully. But anyway, let's see where this memory comes from. It's not a coroner's report, remind you. It's not legally admissible. But this is Dr. Kimball, professor of history in the Southern Illinois University, recovered the letters to Mrs. Miranda Haskett of Ukiah, California, and dated November of 1897. You do the math, clearly 50 years after Joseph Smith's death. The original letters are now in the possession of Mrs. Donald Martin, a great-granddaughter of Barnes, of Santa Rosa. Copies are on file in the Huntington Library, of course. Huntington was a Mormon reprobate. And then Illinois State Historical Library in Southern Illinois University, Edwardsville. All but the final quotation from Barnes are taken from the letter. This information is gleaned from the Thomas Gregg History of Hancock, Illinois, correspondence with the Alumni Association at the University of... Okay, I'm going to look at this history of Hancock County because I do have many other histories of non-Mormons who remembered the Joseph Smith affair in Illinois very well. And one of the Illinois historians alludes to the fact that William Morgan faked his death. Now, William Morgan was known to Joseph Smith Sr. at the lodge, at the Mason Lodge. William Morgan supposedly was publishing secrets of the Masonic Lodge, and he was kidnapped, taken up to Niagara Falls, and then thrown over the falls, or there was some kind of elaborate scheme where he was taken all over Canada into the north. And basically, it's such an elaborate plot to take somebody, kidnap him, and then only to dump his body in the river later on. It really taxes credulity. All right. And what these elaborate kind of stories indicate is that they're a cover story for something else that happened. So, as liars get more and more bold, they add more detail to their stories, and suddenly, William Morgan not only was murdered, but then Joseph Smith Jr. married William Morgan's wife. Of course he did, because Joseph Smith married every woman he ever met, according to the elaborations and the embellishments of later accounts by kind of the uneducated Brighamites in Utah, who just marveled at the prowess, the sexual prowess of Joseph Smith, and wish they had it. Of course they don't. They're round-headed, pot-bellied, bald men who, as we know from fundamentalists, they like young girls just to service them while they lay in easy chairs, much like Jeffrey Epstein. Oh, let me take a massage and turn over and have you service me while I lie here just completely motionless, because I am what you call a very lazy lover. I'm really not a lover. I just want you to service me, period. This is the mentality of these men. This is the coroner's report. This is a paper on the coroner's report of Carthage. And as I discussed in my theory that Joseph Smith survived Carthage, is the glaring absence of a coroner's testimony certifying the legal death or the homicide of both Hyrum and Joseph Smith Jr. This is unheard of because people are not who do not have the expertise cannot certify the death or certify a homicide in a legal proceeding. Just like I am an attorney, but I cannot testify as far as the medical evidence of an expert doctor. Therefore, all the testimony in the conspiracy trial of Carthage, only the testimony of young boys who supposedly saw Joseph Smith get shot or get saved by an angel, okay, and then a 17-year-old who ran into the jail and said he found Hyrum's body and he surely was dead. This cannot be substantial evidence to determine that Joseph and Hyrum were murdered. The only legal evidence that is acceptable in court proceeding is a medical doctor who's an expert, or two, a legal coroner who's been elected or serves as the expert for the county. And of course, as I said, in the Carthage conspiracy trial, there was no coroner. The first coroner that supposedly was in office at the time the Smiths were assassinated fled the jurisdiction, left the state, and the Mormon coroner who had just been elected refused to testify. So both coroners, perhaps, which I says, indicates a guilty mind, which means they didn't examine the bodies or the bodies weren't dead. They left instead of testifying. So that is called circumstantial evidence. But number one, a prima facie case or a case of assassination must be established by a certified legal medical opinion that a body of a person is dead and that it is the medical report opinion that it was either a homicide through murder, homicide through manslaughter, or an accidental death. Okay, it doesn't necessarily mean that somebody is guilty of killing the person in a homicide. There's accidental deaths, there's negligent manslaughter deaths, but in order to have a first degree, second degree murder, you must have a coroner's report or medical expert giving an opinion that this was a homicide. And then the rest of the story is how that homicide occurred. Was it first degree, second degree, third degree, fourth degree murder, and who were the perpetrators? That is done by other evidence. But you cannot have a murder trial, you cannot have an assassination trial without the prima facie case that a homicide occurred, and this can only be done by expert medical opinion. So I was curious in this new movie that's gaining a lot of interest about the Carthage conspiracy. I think it's excellent. I think it was just an excellent film and very well done. Cinematography was great. So that's all I can say about that. I just have a different theory. And my theory starts with the real forensics, which there was no legal certification that the Smiths were dead. We have two eyewitnesses that said, oh, they were surely dead. But let me just tell you about this era of dead people in the Western states. Medical evidence was so primitive that even doctors could not really tell if a body was dead. So if you wake up in the morning and you find Aunt Mary cold and stiff in her bed, well, what do? You call the coroner. Yeah, they say, okay, looks dead, and he can certify a death certificate. But then the precaution of the era was to hold a wake. And what is a wake? A wake is a 7-day period in which the family surveils the body, or they wait for perhaps the miracle that this dead person might wake up, because many times it has been written in history, people have been buried and they wake up in their coffins and they have already been buried. So it was precautionary to wait 7 days to really make sure that a person was dead and they just didn't wake up from a coma, which mimicked death. Additionally, an additional precaution is this was practiced all through the South, is to bury a person in a coffin with a straw for breathing and a bell, so that if the person wakes up in the coffin and finds that he has been buried and he's actually alive, then they can breathe through the straw up to the ground and they can ring a bell, and that would alert passersby that, oh my gosh, there's somebody alive that's been buried down there. And these are actual facts of this era where the medical evidence was so primitive that not even doctors could really certify somebody dead, probable death, but then the family would take precautions and involve themselves in a 7 day wake. That is what a wake is called. When the body wakes up and Aunt Mary really isn't dead. So that is the backdrop of this murder mystery of the Smiths not being certified or not being evaluated by a medical doctor who wrote a report certifying that they were indeed dead and that it was done by a homicide, not a natural cause death, but a homicide. And then the later evidence by the police would then investigate, was it a homicide, manslaughter, was it intentional and second degree, third degree, or perhaps first degree murder. But you prima facie case is absolutely necessary. So that's my forensics. So we're starting out with the fact that no coroner certified the Smiths were dead. We have two young lads. Hamilton's testimony that he saw Joseph Smith fall and he appeared dead, and a light came out of the skies and protected him. Okay, and that was it. There's testimony garbled that there were some shots fired. Again, that was not included in the trial. What was included in the trial was the young lad who ran up to the room and looked at Hyrum's body laid out in the jail, and he said he appeared to be dead. Okay, still not legal evidence. All right. So, just as a backdrop, that it was so important that if you were going to prosecute a person for murder in these very primitive times of the 19th century, that you must certify to the judge that the victim of the homicide was indeed murdered and dead, not just going to wake up sometime in a week from now, but is indeed dead. Okay, so now I'm investigating this coroner's report that this was done. Okay, Thomas L. Barnes, coroner of Carthage. This is a paper done by Stanley B. Kimball, published in the Brigham Young University. And I've skipped the first couple of pages, but let's start to read from here. Page 143. About a week later, Joseph Smith voluntarily went into Carthage on June 24th to face charges of treason against the state and the people of Illinois. On the morning of June 25th, Joseph and Hyrum surrendered themselves to the constable Bettensworth. Barnes said that he accompanied Bettensworth when the writs were served and spent some time in conversation with Joseph Smith, possibly because of this personal visit with the prophet, he modified his radical feelings for in relation to the murder of Joseph and Hyrum on the 27th. He condemns the brave guards who were supposed to have protected the prisoners. They fired blank cartridges over the heads of the mob. Point number one, blank cartridges. The guns were filled with blanks. My impression is that they were equally guilty as any one of the mob. And I will later discuss with you what this mob was made of. It's made up of young boys, the Carthage Greys, and we're talking about boys under the age of 21, not real reliable boys. okay? And the guns were with them because they had done a parade for Governor Ford that day. Well, when you do a parade, you do not load guns with actual ammunition. You load them with, at most, blanks, so that when you have to pull a demonstration of shooting those guns, they go off, but you're not wasting real ammunition. You are just basically filled with blanks, and the smoke goes off, and the firing cap pops, and it appears that something has been fired when a bullet really has not been fired. Okay, so in his account of the attack as follows: it appears that one of the balls in the commencement of the attack passed through the panel of the door and hit Hyrum in his neck, which probably broke his neck. See how he used probably broke his neck? What's he talking about? I don't know. I guess he's saying that Hyrum's neck was broken. He fell back and died, as I was informed instantly. Okay, so he was informed by whom I don't know. When I went into the room shortly afterwards, his head was laying against the wall, on the other side of the room from the door. The attacking party forced the door open and commenced firing at Smith, as he staggered across the floor to the opposite side of the room, where there was a window. It is said that there he gave the hailing sign of distress of a mason, but that it did him no good. In the room behind him were armed men, furious men, with murder in their hearts. Before him around the well, under the window, there was a crowd of desperate men, as he was receiving shots from behind, which he could not stand. In desperation, he leaped, or rather fell out the window near the well. Before him around the well, under the window, there was a crowd of desperate men, as he was receiving shots from behind, which he could not stand. In desperation, he leaped, or rather fell out of the window near the well, where he breathed his last. When I found him soon afterwards, he was laying in the hall at the foot of the stairs, where his blood had, as I believe, left indelible stains on the floor. So does that make sense? Okay, let's start that again. Okay, before him, we're talking about Joseph Smith. Around the well, under the window, there was a crowd of desperate men, as he was receiving shots from behind, which he could not stand. In desperation, he leaped, or rather fell out the window near the well, where he breathed his last. When I found him soon afterward, he was laying in the hall at the foot of the stairs, where his blood had, as I believe, left indelible stains on the floor. So it would appear from here that Joseph fell out the window, died, and then somebody dragged his body into the jail at the foot of the stairs where there was blood. Okay, doesn't make much sense, does it? But this is what the coroner might have been told. And the coroner can only rely on eyewitnesses to what occurred and then make his determination of whether the bodies are dead. These tragic reminiscences, which at the time of this writing of the letter were more than 50 years old, continue with reference to John Taylor. All right, this is not a coroner's report. This is reminiscences of coroner, who is now concocting a story which I say he refused to testify at trial. So this is not a coroner's report. This is a reminiscence of a coroner at the time of Joseph Smith's death who refused to testify and actually left the state of Illinois in order to avoid testifying. And that's my theory. It's because he was involved in this conspiracy to assist Joseph Smith and the Smith brothers to survive Carthage. And my theory is also that the Carthage Greys were a crowd of young boys whipped up to go witness this live action play of Smith dying, and so that it would be a good cover for the Smiths, Hyrum and Joseph, to go into hiding after they faked their death. Everything seems to point to this because this was the highly unusual trial in which all the eyewitnesses refused to testify. Only hearsay witnesses and two young lads who exaggerated what they saw. So let's go forward here. These tragic reminiscences, which at the time of the writing of the letter were more than 50 years old, continue with a reference to John Taylor. Shall I not try to describe the wounds that Taylor received and got over them? Well, let me tell you where we found him. I cannot impress on your minds of his appearance. As he appeared to us, that it appeared to us, we were taken to him by the jailer. We found him in a pile of straw. It appeared that the straw bed had been emptied in the cell where he was when we found him. He was very much frightened as well as severely wounded. It took strong persuading of the jailer as well as the positive assurances that we meant him no harm. When we examined him, we found that he had been hit by 4 balls. One ball had hit him in the forearm, then passed down and lodged in his hand between the phalanges, a finger bone, of his third and fourth fingers. Another hit him in. Continuing, they're talking about John Taylor. We found him in a pile of straw. It appeared that the straw bed had been emptied in the cell next, where he was taken, and where we found him. He was very much frightened as well as severely wounded. It took strong persuading by the jailer, as well as our positive assurances that we meant him no harm. When we examined him, we found that he had been hit by 4 balls. One ball hit him in the forearm, passed down and lodged in his hand between the phalanges, a finger bone, of his third and fourth fingers. Another hit him superficially in the side of his pelvis. A third ball passed through his thigh, lodging in his lymph nodes or groin. So that's the only deep wound he sustains, according to the memory 50 years later of this coroner, who does not say he actually examined the bodies. He's giving more information about examining John Taylor's body than he gives of examining Joseph Smith and Hyrum Smith. So that's to be noted. He actually examined John Taylor, but there's no indication in this letter that he actually examined Joseph Smith or Hyrum Smith. He only observed their bodies. Anyway, so let's go on. So the 4th ball hit his watch, which he had as a fob in his pantaloons, which I suppose the Mormons have today to show the precise time that their great leader was killed. Now, this is an occult symbol. When the old grandfather clock stops, never to go again, it's an end of an era. And so clocks and watch fobs stopped at a precise time are an occultic symbol that is well known. And this is the end of the Smith era and the beginning of the Brighamite era. That is what this watch symbolism is all about. And there's some kind of elaborate story. It's so many stories and so much documents, such a voluminous pile of documents to go through, because these things have been written and forged, put into places, put into old libraries. Hoffman found old documents that he forged and would buy off document dealers, in which he had hidden the documents among the document dealers' inventory and said, oh, look what I found. I found this letter or this ancient document by the 12 or by Brigham Young or by whatever. This is how you forge documents. And this basically makes it very difficult to know with precision which documents are forged and which are not. But what is not forged is a letter of memory 50 years later with no actual coroner's report examining the body. None to be found. They say they're probably going to, what I would suspect is that in order to remedy, they're going to try and forge a coroner's report. But this coroner states he has no memory of actually examining Smith or Hyrum's body. He can't tell you what exactly happened, other than he believes Hiram Smith's neck had been broken. Why he believed that, I don't know. But anyway, so the wounds of John Taylor had bled quite freely. The blood at the time had started to coagulate. He was a pitiful looking sight. We took the best care of him. We took the best care of him we could till he left us. I guess he didn't need much help. He got well, but never paid us for our skill or good wishes. Very interesting, because John Taylor and Willard Richards went into hiding after they filed their complaints. So this is the story continues. The following information on Willard Richards. You want to know what has become of Richards? He was not hurt. You will ask how it happened that his comrades were so badly treated and he came off without receiving any damage whatsoever. It was in this way, as I suppose. Again, speculation. I think he told me this. The four braced themselves against the door to keep the mob out. He stood next to the hinges of the door, so when the door opened, it turned back against the wall. It turned him back against the wall, shutting him up against the wall, and he stood there and did not move until the affair was over, so that they did not see him. After we were through with Taylor, I went to Richards and said to him, Richards, what does all this mean? Who's done this? Said he, Doctor, I do not know, but I believe it is some Missourians that came over and had killed brothers Joseph and Hyrum and wounded brothers Taylor. Said I to him, Do you believe that? He said, I do. I will then write it down and send it to Nauvoo. He said he would, and he said he would if he could find any person to take it. I told him that he would take it. Okay, so here's an example of Willard Richards lying about the crowd. It's obvious that they were being assaulted by the Carthage Greys, but he's alleging it is Missourians that had come over to kill Brother Joseph. And as you recall, William Law had gathered 12 Missourians late at night to come up the Mississippi River and threatened Joseph Smith late at night in about, I believe, early June of 1844. So John Taylor obviously is using the, Willard Richards is repeating the myth or the William Law story of bringing up Missourians, which Joseph Smith had testified. So again, misinformation given by Willard Richards purposely. This would indicate to me that Willard Richards, John Taylor were in conspiracy with the Carthage Greys, and John Sharp, who had come over from Warsaw, had led the Carthage Greys to the jail to assassinate Hyrum and Joseph Smith. Why else would John Taylor lie and say that he believed it was Missourians when it was obvious that it was Carthage and Nauvoo assailants with the Carthage? And additionally, John Taylor and Willard Richards had been taken into this anteroom or this jail cell and locked in, according to the docents at Carthage, by the jailer, who I thought the jailer was gone, but now the jailer has appeared. But they were locked in the cell next to the room where Hyrum and Smith were supposedly killed. They never saw the bodies again. They were locked up. And so when this coroner guest found them, they were huddling in the next room not knowing exactly what had happened outside. It was close to probably 30 to 40 minutes before they were found and led by the jailer. The coroner was led up the stairs by the jailer. Now, the only information we have that Joseph Smith's body was dragged into the jail at the foot of the stairs is this coroner's reminiscences 50 years later. There's no reminiscence of this coroner examining Joseph Smith's body or examining Hyrum Smith's body. Only from hearsay, he believed that Hyrum had supposedly sustained an injury to his neck, which supposedly broke his neck. Not very good forensics, I'd say. So in November 1845, in the courthouse, for the purpose of rejecting and deprecating such acts as the perpetrations against the Mormons, Thomas L. Barnes was appointed secretary of the meeting. The following resolution was made and unanimously adopted. Resolved. Anyway, it goes on, a resolution that they decry what had happened to the Mormons, that they wanted the Mormons not to be um, persecuted, and that they did not believe in this violence that occurred against Smith or the Mormons, and that they resolved that the Illinois, let's see, I believe they said the Illinois militia or the Illinois United States military could take over the peace in the county. And this was signed by Marsh, Sherman, and Skinner. Now, of course, we never hear about the fact that the Carthage was in outrage about the supposed assassination of the Smiths. But again, what's clearly absent is any identification of the Smith brothers and examination of their bodies, which leads to my theory that they faked their deaths. They had well in advance knowledge that this was going to happen. Governor Ford came down. Governor Ford was a friend. William O. Douglas, a reputable politician, considered Joseph Smith his friend. Abraham Lincoln sent court watchers to observe the Smith trial in Springfield to make sure it was fair. Joseph Smith was a well-loved and respected politician in Nauvoo and clearly held the vote for these politicians in Illinois. And they were anti-slavery, all of them. And they were getting ready for the Civil War. And the Smith brothers were part of this border ruffian or these mobs out west that clearly cause tyranny on the Western Front. And Joseph and Hyrum are going to be considered heroes someday in leading the United States westward and bringing these brave settlers to withstand all this violence that occurred that were paid for infiltrators from Great Britain. And that's what all the Quorum of the 12, they're Canadian, they're from Great Britain, and one of Joseph Smith's arch enemies is Alexander Campbell, a Scottish enlightened preacher born and raised and educated in Scotland, who came over to start religious movements on the Western Front to support the British. Okay, and they were the counter. Alexander Campbell was the counter Hegelian dialect against the Unitarians that were started by the Smith movement of the primitive church, which just did not believe in original sin, which believed that children did not die in sin simply because they weren't baptized. That this was blasphemy to the Roman Catholic Church. This was blasphemy to the Cromwellian Catholic Church. So let's be real here. Joseph Smith has been framed by history, and may as well, because the Brigham Young, I believe, can figure out if Joseph Smith died by doing supposedly DNA tests on the two bodies they exhumed. I believe those two bodies are the two people that were murdered, or the two people that supposedly they said Joseph Smith killed with his gun. I believe those were two tyrants that were not informed that they were surrounded by friendly Mormons that were acting as mobsters. Okay, so when they rushed up the up the stairs to the jail toward Joseph Smith, what probably happened is these two men that were part of the mob but were unknowing parts of the mob were actually killed. And it's these two bodies that were buried in the mansion house. And it is these two bodies that they exhumed. And I believe DNA testing can be done on these bodies, and that will settle the theory of whether or not Joseph Smith and Hyrum survived Carthage, because we do have forensics on Joseph Smith's children.